No one in Britain knew it yet, but the summer of 1940 would decide the fate of the free world. Across the Channel, the fires of France were still burning. Hitler's armies had crushed a nation in 6 weeks, and British soldiers had barely escaped through the smoke of Dunkirk. To many watching around the world, especially in America, it looked like Britain would be next, and quickly. From the cliffs of northern France, German officers stared across just 32 kilometers of water toward the white cliffs of Dover, convinced the island would fall like every other country before it. In Berlin, planners of Operation Sea Lion drafted invasion orders with the confidence of men who believed math and fear were on their side. They had reasons to feel certain. Britain had lost thousands of trucks, tanks, guns, and almost all heavy equipment in France. The army was scattered, exhausted, and desperately trying to rebuild. German logic was simple. The Luftwaffe would crush the RAF. The Royal Navy wouldn't dare face German air power. And once German troops landed, they expected only thin resistance before marching into London. What truly convinced the German High Command was something more dangerous than numbers. They believed British morale was broken. They had seen the footage of Dunkirk, burning ships, stranded soldiers, panicked evacuations. To them, Britain looked ready to crack. Maybe even ready to make peace. And so the invasion plans assumed the British people would stay out of the fight. They prepared for battles against regular troops, airfields, and naval bases, but not against civilians. Germany simply didn't know what was happening in the towns and villages of southern England. While German bombers photographed coastal defenses and military bases, they missed something far more important: ordinary British citizens training to fight street by street. In church halls, cricket fields, back gardens, and village basements, thousands of men were learning how to shoot, map their neighborhoods, block roads, and ambush invaders. What the Germans saw as a defeated island was in fact waking up in a wave of defiance. This was the same stubbornness that had carried British soldiers through Waterloo and the First World War. And now it lived in shopkeepers, farmers, clerks, and old veterans who refused to surrender their island to anyone. Everything changed on May 14, 1940, when War Secretary Anthony Eden went on BBC Radio and made one of the most successful recruitment calls in British history. He asked for volunteers, men between 17 and 65 who were not already in the military, to join a new force, the local defense volunteers. The response was explosive. Within 24 hours, 250,000 men had rushed to sign up. Police stations ran out of forms. Phone lines crashed. Entire villages lined up outside town halls before sunrise. By the end of May, the number had passed 300,000. They were bakers, butchers, office clerks, teenagers, gray-haired grandfathers who'd survived the Somme, and all were determined to fight with something better than a kitchen knife if the Germans came. The organization was chaotic but unstoppable. Units were led by whoever had experience: a retired colonel, a former sergeant major, or even a capable schoolteacher. They trained with broomsticks, wooden rifles, and farm tools because the army had lost so much equipment at Dunkirk there was none left to spare. Churchill hated the dull name Local Defense Volunteers. On July 23, he changed it to Home Guard, a title that instantly carried pride and purpose. German soldiers would later mock the name, but they had no idea what these men were becoming. By late 1940, the Home Guard had grown to 1.5 million men, the largest citizen army Britain had raised since medieval times. They knew every field, every hedge, every alleyway of their own towns. What they lacked in weapons, they replaced with determination. But equipment shortages were crushing. Some units received old Canadian rifles with little ammunition. Others drilled with shotguns donated by citizens. A few even carried pikes, 7-foot poles with bayonets welded on, approved by the War Office for fighting paratroopers in tight spaces. Then came America's unexpected help. Between July and October, over 500,000 US-made rifles arrived. Old WWII weapons covered in thick cosmoline, but to men who had been holding broomsticks, they might as well have been gold. With rifles came more dangerous tools. The No. 74 sticky bomb, a glass ball of nitroglycerin meant to cling to tank armor. The British issued Molotov cocktail, filled with burning fuel and phosphorus. Crude but effective, enough to make any invading German think twice. And then officers reviewing the Home Guard realized something startling. 1 in 3 volunteers had already fought in the Great War. These weren't amateurs. These were men who had survived trenches, machine guns, and artillery for years. And they were preparing to do it again, this time on their own soil. And this was where the Home Guard's greatest strength revealed itself, the men who had already lived through one world war. Many volunteers weren't just older. They had once been sergeants who'd led charges across no man's land, Lewis gunners who knew how to place deadly fire, veteran snipers, mortar crews, and even medal winners who rarely spoke of what they did but never forgot how to do it. This created a strange but powerful mix inside the Home Guard. You could see a 19-year-old mechanic being taught rifle drills by a 58-year-old postman who'd been a machine gunner at Ypres. The young man had energy, but the veteran had something far more valuable: experience earned under fire. These older soldiers understood things you couldn't learn from any manual. They knew how machine guns shaped killing zones, where infantry should never run. They knew attacking troops weren't most vulnerable while advancing, but in the moment they dropped to the ground, breath-heaving, exposed and unsure whether to move again. They knew which bits of terrain were death traps and which shallow ditch could save a life. German planners assumed they'd face civilians with no real skill. They forgot that Britain had mobilized millions during the Great War, and hundreds of thousands were still alive, still sharp, and now volunteering again. German intelligence saw clerks and shopkeepers. What they missed was that many of those clerks had once been artillery spotters who knew how to call in fire, and many shopkeepers had been experts with Vickers machine guns. Those skills didn't vanish when the war ended, they were simply waiting. These veterans shaped the Home Guard's tactics. They positioned rifles so fields of fire overlapped, creating deadly corridors. They picked fallback points so men could retreat safely under fire. They taught younger volunteers how to place mortars, estimate ranges, adjust shots, then immediately shift position before enemy counterfire arrived. This wasn't theory, this was survival knowledge. They also brought something intangible: psychological strength. When a nervous teenager asked what combat felt like, the answer came from men who had survived years of shelling, gas attacks, cold, hunger, and fear. These veterans didn't romanticize war. They knew exactly how terrible it was, and they were still ready to fight, because they had seen what happened to nations that didn't resist. Germany expected frightened civilians. Instead, they would have met men who understood fire and movement, suppressive fire, urban defense, and ambush tactics far better than any invader imagined. The Home Guard wasn't built to stop panzers in open fields. But in towns, villages, crossroads, hedgerows, and narrow lanes, they were a nightmare waiting to happen. And they were transforming the British countryside into a defensive maze invisible to German maps. While the Wehrmacht photographed concrete bunkers and beach obstacles, they completely missed the far more dangerous work happening behind the hedgerows. A quiet country lane might hide a roadblock ready to drop in seconds. A peaceful stone bridge could be wired to blow. A harmless-looking barn might conceal a machine gun nest with perfect fields of fire. The scale of construction was astonishing. From mid-1940 to late 1941, Britain built around 28,000 pillboxes, small concrete forts for infantry and machine guns. Many followed standard designs, but Home Guard units customized them based on local knowledge. A pillbox in Kent looked different from one in Sussex because its builders knew exactly which angles mattered and where attackers would likely appear. Defensive lines sprang up everywhere. Rivers became tank barriers. Railway embankments were turned into firing positions. High ground became observation posts connected by field telephones. What German intelligence couldn't see, they couldn't plan for. A green hedgerow might hide a concrete bunker. A pretty village green might have been mapped for mortar fire with preset ranges. A narrow lane might be a perfect kill zone known to everyone in the village. Even the roadblocks were brilliant. Major roads had permanent tank traps, but smaller back roads had quick drop beams and steel-reinforced obstacles that men could activate in moments. And the defenders knew exactly which routes German vehicles would need: bridges strong enough for tanks, gaps wide enough for trucks, lanes that bottlenecked perfectly for an ambush. Local knowledge became Britain's secret weapon. The Home Guard knew every footpath, every field gate, every ditch, every tree line. They knew which roads flooded after rain, which woods were too dense for vehicles, which corners offered ideal ambush angles. A German officer might have a perfect map from Portsmouth to London, but that map wouldn't say the next village narrowed so tightly that armored vehicles would be funneled into a death trap, or that a bridge ahead couldn't hold anything heavier than a farm tractor. The Home Guard didn't have to study maps, they lived the terrain. They knew which houses had basements strong enough for ammunition, which attics overlooked the high street, which walls were thick stone and which were useless plaster. Their training exercises weren't about learning the land, they were about learning how to use it to kill an invading force quickly. Then came one of the most dramatic moments of 1940. On the afternoon of September 7, 1940, the day began like many during the Blitz. Londoners were recovering from the previous night's bombing, and across the south, Home Guard units were running weekend drills. But at 8 p.m., everything changed. General Headquarters issued the code word, Cromwell. It meant only one thing: invasion expected. The warning raced through Britain's defense network. Phones rang from headquarters to company leaders. Runners sprinted through dark lanes. And across the southern counties, church bells, silent since June except for invasion, began to ring wildly. Civilians poured into the streets, terrified the landings had begun. Within 2 hours, 1.5 million Home Guard volunteers were moving to their stations, carrying rifles, sticky bombs, Molotovs, and the fierce determination that if Germany came ashore, they would make the invaders pay dearly for every step. And the threat was real. RAF reconnaissance had spotted invasion barges gathering in French and Belgian ports, hundreds of vessels, troop carriers, supply ships, and river barges crowding the harbors of Calais, Boulogne, Ostend, and Dunkirk. The Luftwaffe's intensified bombing of London convinced British intelligence that the long-expected invasion was imminent. German artillery had begun shelling Dover, and every available sign suggested Operation Sea Lion might begin within hours. Home Guard units rushed to their assigned posts. Men crouched in concrete pillboxes along the Sussex beaches, roadblock crews in Kent braced behind sandbags, and thousands more lined the coast from Cornwall to Norfolk, staring into the moonlit channel for the first hint of landing craft. In the confusion of a sudden nationwide mobilization, false alarms spread quickly. Church bells, part of the invasion warning system, led several units to assume German paratroopers were already dropping. Nervous volunteers fired at shadows, friendly aircraft, and in one tragic case, another Home Guard patrol that had strayed into the wrong sector. Improvised roadblocks appeared where none were planned, disrupting military traffic. In scattered towns, demolition charges meant for bridges were blown too early, no one certain whether through panic or poor judgment. The long night was a test of endurance. Training confidence evaporated as men discovered the agony of waiting for a real enemy. Every wave on the water looked like an approaching barge. Every distant hum sounded like engines. Battalion commanders struggled to maintain order and prevent friendly fire as exhausted, anxious men held their breath for dawn. Morning broke on September 8th with empty seas. Reconnaissance confirmed no German fleet was moving. By afternoon, the Cromwell alert was lifted, though many units stayed on edge for days. The mobilization proved the Home Guard could react fast, but it also revealed the cost of inexperience. Better training became essential. Drills with broomsticks were harmless. Live explosives and anti-tank weapons were not. Once the War Office authorized full live-fire instruction, accidents rose sharply. From 1940 to 1944, roughly 1,200 Home Guard members were killed in training and several thousand badly injured. Grenade mishaps, explosive failures, burns from sticky bombs, ricochets during street fighting exercises, and demolition charges that went off too early. Yet these painful losses forced the Home Guard to become a genuine fighting force. Their competence, dedication, and willingness to train under real danger gradually changed regular officers' attitudes. By 1942, Home Guard units were no longer symbolic auxiliaries. They were being woven directly into Britain's defensive structure. They took over coastal positions so regular infantry could deploy to North Africa. They manned a third of Britain's anti-aircraft guns, directing searchlights and firing solutions through the night. They guarded vital factories, rail junctions, power stations, fuel depots, and communications hubs, freeing thousands of trained soldiers for overseas duty. Joint exercises with regular troops grew routine, and the Home Guard received better weapons, uniforms, and equipment. In many static defenses, they looked and performed little differently from professional soldiers. German intelligence eventually recognized this transformation. By late 1940, planners realized that any landing on Britain meant not only battling regular divisions but fighting through a 1.5 million strong, armed, organized population ready to resist in every village and every street. Even if the Germans reached London, they would arrive exhausted and surrounded by defenders who had rehearsed exactly how to fight them. Hitler's attention drifted east toward the Soviet Union, and Operation Sea Lion slipped quietly into indefinite postponement. Officially delayed, effectively abandoned. In the end, the Home Guard's greatest triumph was the battle they never had to fight. Their presence, visible, disciplined, and determined, turned Britain into a fortress too costly to assault. The pitchforks of 1940 had become real weapons in trained hands, and Hitler saw in them not an amateur militia but the makings of a national army that would bleed his divisions dry.